All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the January 17th edition of API Machinery. I'm going to share my screen with the agenda here in a second. And let me make sure I get the right, hold on. Make sure I get the right window. Hold on, let me try again. There we go. Okay. Cool. Stefan, it looks like you're first on the list.
Yeah, it's just a heads up. There's an umbrella issue about auditing going to GA for 110, and yeah, just go to this issue and look through it. I just added it because there's an overlap of deeply internal API machinery changes and auditing, so everybody can take a look. That's all we did.
So I guess just a checklist from me would be something like, are we sure that it actually works with constituent API servers and have the consumers? And I remember that someone at Google was trying to develop to use it, Tim, I think. If he actually has operational experience using it, and if he can comment on the different pieces he's used, just because there are a lot of different options, and I'd like to make sure that most of them, at least, have actually been used before calling it GA.
So the multi-server topic is one of the items in the issue. And I agree, I think this is not completely clear and mostly ignored. So this is important probably.
Okay. So I guess I would consider that something that that needs to be solved for GA, right? Kube API server is one of many. And we want to be able to audit all of them.
All right.
Wait, sorry. One more thing on that. Oh, never mind. Sorry. I'll save it for the later topic.
Okay. Next on the list. David is looking for someone to pursue API server config. I looked at that issue right before we came here, and the issue is talking about publishing API server config. I think it's premature to publish it.
I am asking whether someone is interested in doing it because it's been on the backlog. I have a general interest in seeing it. I know that the kubelet is struggling through it now, but if someone was really interested in trying to see and experiment, it would be something that I'd be willing to review polls for.
I am. Is it like reflecting what's the RBAC rules that's respected by the API server?
No, this would be about right now we have a bunch of config that isn't flagged. This would be about separating that and make it come from a config file of some sort.
Okay.
Yeah.
Config.
Yeah.
So this is my offer to review, but not do. If someone really wanted to do. Otherwise, I'm going to kick it another release.
Yeah, I don't see us having staffing to work on it right now. So.
All right, kicked.
Where do you feel critical that is blocked by this?
Other people may feel differently, but I don't.
If there's a side conversation there, we can't hear it.
Oh, you is asking if anything critical is blocked by this, and I'm saying other people may feel differently, but I don't think so.
Okay. I mean, yeah, if someone feels like they're blocked by it, they would have staffing to fix it, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's funny how that works.
The issue is saying it's dumping the API.
Yeah, that's what I said when we first started talking about it, but we can't dump a config that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist yet, so there's nothing to dump.
I think dumping is useful in general, like what's the RBAC rules, what's the webhook config rules.
This is not about RBAC rules. This is about command line flags, like what APIs are turned on, how many API servers are in there, what's the certs, all the stuff that we control in flags.
Maybe the flags and the RBAC rules can be represented by the same API.
You can already read the RBAC rules,
But you don't know if it's already ordered by the API server or not. It's the same issue with webhooks.
Oh no, that's Chow is talking about for CRDs, for aggregated APIs. There's currently no introspection API to let you know if a particular API server has seen the latest version of the configuration change. That would be a completely different mechanism. This is not related, I think. Yeah. Okay, next on the list, we were talking here, we talked a little bit about CRDs 2 weeks ago at this meeting. My colleagues and I here have talked about them in hallways since then. And one thought we had was, why not just take CRDs to GA in 1.10? What's blocking us?
I think Clayton made a good point. He typed in there. We don't have Prometheus metrics. It's similar to the admission problem that we had, where we had to get metrics before we called it beta. We just didn't think about it for CRDs.
If we want versioning, we need a breaking change, because at the moment there's just one version in the type.
We'll be able to have either a V2 or an additional versions, right? And we can actually have both. We've done that transformation in other APIs.
Yeah, I think we can add versioning in a V2, but separately, we've volunteered Mehdi to think about this. So this is the other reason I put this on the list, is to fish for other people who are interested in working on CRD versioning, and we can have a short working group or just a more informal series of design meetings.
So I sent an email for that, and I'll have a draft design doc soon. I will share it with you guys, and then we can continue discussion there. I think Stefan had some points in that email I need clarification on, so I'll talk with him.
Yeah, if you have a link to the document, just share.
Sure. It's not completed. I'll just need some days to finish it and send a draft, maybe next week.
So is the current thought that we will hold off on GA for CRD versioning, or wait for a V2 for CRD versioning?
We could actually add it to a V1, I think, even with the concern about, there is a particular field in other APIs. What we've done is added another slice that says something like additional versions in the GA version that exists, and then bumped to another version to have it just in line with the different serialization. It looks prettier. So it's a backwards compatible change.
Okay.
Yeah, that was what I needed clarification on, Stefan. So.
I was going to say, it feels like the decision to go GA will depend on what the design for versioning looks like in scope, but then there's a set of other work. And is the set of other work enumerated? That's something that maybe I missed this was going to be in a doc, or there was a doc on that. I saw the email chain. I didn't know if there was anything more than that.
I still think this issue is that you cannot know when it's re-registered in the endpoints. This is pretty critical for our users. I hear it from every operator implementer. So this might be something for GA.
Sorry, Stefan, you can't know the what?
You register the CID, and it takes half a second or so that all API servers know about it. So people put in just sleeps, and there's no way to be sure that it's really registered and you don't get a 404.
That's the thing that Chow was just talking about a minute ago.
Yeah, it leads to flakes and tests as well. Do we have good enough test coverage on CRD at this point? Do we have any gaps that we feel exist in testing this out of the box in ED?
The tests were pretty good. Generally, they will wait until discovery updates, which tells you whether the one that you checked has it, not whether all have it, which I suppose is the distinction.
I think even there's a race at the moment.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe we should go ahead and make a issue in the features repo, or however we track these things nowadays, and pool all of our requirements and see if we can do it or not.
We add promoting some set of those tests to conformance tests to that list of requirements to go to GA.
Jago is asking if we should move tests to conformance as part of GA. I would kind of expect tests to go to conformance after GA. It's a little weird to have that as a requirement for GA.
And that is the trending direction, although it hasn't been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. And the next item on the list is from a username I don't recognize.
Yeah. I'm a new guy, sorry. So this one is from user for developer experience. So when trying to develop out of cluster API server and then register it on for example, on the Minikube cluster, it's very hard to actually. I mean, it's possible to do it, but for example, the port is hard coded, and you have to run your API server in privilege mode and etc. So you cannot run, for example, multiple custom API servers on your local machine during development. So I'm not sure if this is the right place, or I have been preparing like an issue, or so.
Yeah, you're saying you basically require you to serve on 443, and you're trying to run it on your local system.
Services should be able to give you a target port and an exposed port, right?
Yeah, but it's always on 443.
Just the service, yeah.
The service has to be, but the target port can be whatever you want. The service port gives you that adapter.
Yeah, that only works if you're running it inside a Docker container, right? If you're trying to develop on your local system and you're just running it.
You can use external services with remapping.
It doesn't work.
I don't think that works, actually.
If it is, it's broken and we need to go fix it.
Yeah, that sounds like
we have customers that use that in production and depend on it. They use the service as proxying to outside, and maybe we can take this up afterwards in SIG API Machinery in the chat channel.
Yeah, I think this is definitely worth filing an issue. It sounds like there's at least 2 broken things here. Thanks for bringing it up.
Okay, thanks.
Cole, do you want to describe the item you made?
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit before KubeCon, and then over the holidays it kind of fell by the wayside. But I am going to be starting up a new repo today and sending out mail to SIG API Machinery to start working on a prototype of a dependent resources API. Back before KubeCon, I had talked about this in one of the meetings, and I know this is something that a lot of folks are interested in. Basically, creating a new API to allow for querying of child resources. May that be through owner refs, or may that be through like pod owning a secret, or pod using a secret. And I was starting on a feature design doc for it, and basically kept running into too many places where there were question marks, and needed to actually start writing code to answer some of those questions. Hence why the current plan is to start working on a prototype and work on the design doc in parallel. I don't know if this warrants creating a working group, because I know there are other interested folks, and it would be great to have other folks kind of, doing code reviews and looking at this design as it evolves. But I also don't know what the process is for starting a working group, or if that's appropriate for this sort of a thing.
Well, I don't think right now, at least I haven't seen enough supporting doc explaining even what the working group will be scoped to and why we would be trying to do it and what the particular problems are.
Okay.
I remember we spoke about it before, but I didn't see like a doc output of that. And it's hard to explain to someone, hey, here's this working group and here's why you'd be interested in joining it if we don't have it.
Yeah, okay. You could certainly you can have meetings, get feedback, email, bring people together, write docs without having formed a working group.
Sure.
Usually the working group is there enough people are complaining that this isn't being structured. It's usually when people start complaining that you're being obscure about stuff you're deciding, that you create the working group to keep Joe from yelling at you.
Okay, that helps a lot, actually. Okay, great. Then in that case, I will open up this repo and clean up this document and send that out this afternoon. And folks that are interested can start paying attention to it and chiming in.
Yeah. Okay. I'm definitely interested. I'm definitely interested.
Okay.
Okay, Clayton, server-side get is greenlit. Is that a announcement, or do we need to do something about that?
So Phil and I were going back and forth prior to the break on whether the Open API column JSON path thing that they had put in to kube control was sufficient. And so basically there is, add a JSON path thing to a field in Open API, and then kube control would go and parse the Open API spec, use JSON path to go find it. And that works when you're offline. At least, you have an Open API spec cached locally that you can use. But we were talking about, from a UX perspective, there's things that you just can't do with JSON path. And so it was basically, we wanted to hash out the different use cases and make sure we were all in agreement. And we kind of to ourselves got that to a happy place. I was going to summarize it and send it out. And it basically came down to, at the end of the day, coming up with a meta language to represent how you transform API objects into things that humans can read and understand is a fraught process. And in practice, this is, somebody's going to write some code somewhere, and doing it on the server side gets it to as many clients as possible. CRDs obviously can use the Open API mechanism. So we would take the Open API column mechanism and just use that for all CRDs. So this would be a server-side implementation that hides that detail. The objection to going and doing server-side printing as being unnecessary, we kind of work through that in terms of there's just kube control get is one of the more important UIs we have. It's not acceptable to really have a best effort there for most of our core resources. People would say, well, the platform is unusable because I don't know how, I can't use JSON path to come up with a good pod, kube control get pods UI. And so working backwards from that, the fact that other clients like web consoles could use this for things they didn't know about to offer a best effort experience was the second argument. And based on that, like Phil and I worked through the rationales. And so I'm just going to write that up as the series of things that we're going to go do in 110. There's someone signed up to do it on the CLI side, and then there's some tests, the CRD side on the server, and cleanup code and unit testing to reach conclusion there. And then it seemed reasonable to say that we would go to beta based on the discussions we had in 1.9, where we said we wanted to see this work in the CLI and let it bake before we made the decision to go to beta, but everybody was roughly on board with the schema and the mental model. And so I would assume that statement would hold for 110 unless there's objections here. And then the follow-up was there was a separate discussion going on for partial object metadata for use in garbage collectors and generic controllers that only wanted to fetch. They wanted to get a schema that's the same across all the objects they had to deal with. And so there was a proposal in 1.9 to move that to beta, but nothing happened of it. Barring any feedback, I'd like to push that to beta as well in 1.10.
Sounds good to me.
Can we talk about server-side apply as a follow-on conversation to get that conversation?
Jago's asking about server-side apply. I don't think you can hear him because he's so far away.
Yeah, no, so that was discussed at SIG CLI this morning. So Phil and I were talking about this, and the kind of the proposal was there's been some concern about the full scope of what a server-side apply might look like until we decide some of the things. Jordan had a good suggestion about how to. Jordan and Phil talked at KubeCon about a short-term step that could move some of the hard parts to the server to do the diff, the merge on the server side before we go do and add an API specifically for accepting a merge. And so we suggested using 1.10 to get a working proposal for what it would look like on the server side and get agreement on that for 1.10 and do what we can to break smaller chunks off apply as server-side things or prototypes of server-side things.
Okay, I've been pushing on Phil to eagerly to move apply to the server side. I think trying to replicate that behavior in other clients is a terrible idea.
It's horrible. Everyone hates it.
Yeah.
People just don't use it. That's what they do.
So can we start with the idea that we should try to have a full apply working in 1.11? Is that a reasonable goal, or we don't know yet?
It's reasonable to me. Joe's feedback, I think, at the end of it was it's not clear how on the server side we should store that state. And this goes back to like that long running.
Yeah.
Like when apply was originally designed, we suggested a number of different approaches for storing, the server's preferred copy, the user's preferred copy. All of those are complex. And so I feel like that getting some sort of happy place where we agree on either a compromise or a long-term direction with a short-term series of steps that don't conflict with it is the biggest obstacle to apply on the server side.
So that would suggest that we need to keep talking now in order to ever finish that conversation.
And honestly, like I'm not as worried about it because at this point, I don't think any big like redesigns are going to pragmatically happen because we're too far in and we've got too many real world things to go solve. But I do want to make sure that we, like if somebody does come up with a really clever way to solve this that isn't too much work, I would hate to miss the opportunity before we bake in the API. But I am totally on board with pushing as hard as we can for apply on the server side and getting a consensus and trying to get something in as soon as possible.
All right, next topic. I actually don't know who E&J is.
Mo.
Yeah, it's me. So I wanted to bring this up because I opened a PR a few days ago. I still need to add the tests and stuff. But we had an issue not too long ago where we had a misbehaving component that blew out all of our logs again. But it was so it's just running into handle error over and over. And as it stands right now, there is no.
We had an error. We generated an error while trying to log an error.
Sorry, say that again.
Are you saying we generated an error trying to log an error and then it gets stuck in a loop?
No. It was effectively the component had the same error over and over again to the point that it was effectively logging the same thing 1,000 times a second.
Hot loop.
Right. Yeah, it was stuck in a hot loop.
Don't worry, we helped you. It's only 1,000 times a second. It used to be worse.
Yeah.
Right. I understand the fact that it was worse before, but it's not helpful that there is no instrumentation to understand that the error is useless to me now because I have seen it a million times and I don't need to keep saying it. So this sort of is a first pass attempt at sort of doing some level of tracking of what errors you've seen in the recent-ish past, and then sort of logging them every so often instead of just every time you see them.
So
you're
I have to say, first, I don't object to fixing handle error, but is that a topic for this SIG?
Well, we created it. You and I have maintained it.
Yeah, you guys are all the approvers on the owner's doc for that.
The three people who care are on this call.
Okay. Yeah, I think I may have been the last person to make it take it from like every microsecond down to every millisecond, which clearly that was only a stopgap fix.
Yeah, I didn't have any objection to the dedupe other than it causes new and exciting problems. And the one advantage of tackling at this level is we've actually gotten pretty good mileage out of forcing everybody to use handle error. And we are able to handle some of that. Like in OpenShift, we send all of the handle errors to Sentry. So at least when we get panics in some environments, we're at least reporting those. I feel like there's at least an advantage, we're centralizing where something important that's an easy thing to screw up happens, and that's usually a better scaling strategy.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Mo, were you hoping to get something out of this group, or is this just informational?
I think there was two aspects I wanted to ask. One of the discussions I had with Clayton yesterday was, do we or do we not want to have stack traces coming out? And it was unclear.
I'm against.
So that.
What was the second one?
The second bit is just there is some fuzzy string matching that is in there. So it has the ability to dedupe a little more than just trivial equals to each other. Certainly that will probably use at least some CPU, and that might cause some concern to people.
Why does it do that? Why not look at the record? Sorry, there is a package which will tell you your like runtime.caller will tell you where you were called from. I would expect you to use that and dedupe based on call sites.
There are different, so you have to have an exact call site match, but there are different reasons that you can fail from the same call site. And if you get the same message but with a different namespace in it, for instance, you want the call site to match perfectly, but you want your message to be within 75% the same. Something like that, right? So you don't get a false match from a different call stack, but so that you actually dedupe messages that are listing nothing but unique namespaces.
I actually feel that should be handled not by looking at the message text, but by forcing callers to handle error to pass some sort of deduping key.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that because
I think it's really not a good idea to try and write some sort of I feel like that's an AI complete problem.
There's some standard algorithms for doing it, right?
But one argument would actually be a problem we have today from the generic spigot style errors in controllers is we don't actually know where that might have originated. And so if we were going to go to that effort, just doing more to annotate the error on its way in is required to make that easier to sort back. Because like sources, finding the call stack is at best a hack. The next step, might just be annotating the errors better.
Yeah, I think we should.
I'd still like the implementation steps.
I think we should be adding more intelligent stuff to our errors to make deduping, make it possible to do intelligent deduping.
So I guess I'd still want the implementation to have a spot stubbed in so that we can add it later because it's going to come up.
Sure.
So if I'm understanding clearly, I should remove the fuzzy matching that's in there. It's fine. It's no problem.
Yeah, just comment that out, though, so that we can put it back in later because it's going to blow it out.
Don't comment it out. Put it in a if false block or something.
Fine. I mean, it's one of those, I suspect it'll be the next thing that we need. And it's one that I don't want to say I've seen on my local system. I haven't seen in production yet, probably because they all get filled by something else.
That's fair. So Daniel, you wanted stack traces. Clayton was unsure, and David was meh, I think.
Yeah, I'm willing to have a few lines.
Yeah, I think at least a few lines, especially if it's super handy to have the file name or something in there, because that, if I'm looking at logs, that often saves me a trip. It's certainly a lot easier to search by call site than it is by error message, because the error messages are constructed, and therefore you don't necessarily know what you should search for to find a string match in the source code. So it's super handy to know where the error was sourced from.
Okay. Do I need to guard that with any type of extra glog? Like, you only want this like when you're really concerned, or is it like my concern is the handle error for now is as it currently stands in master always emits effectively one line, no matter what. It's just one line. It's not a multi-line log statement with stuff.
The important thing to me is the call site, file name, and line number. If you can deduce exactly the call site, then just that will make me happy.
Yeah, so it's still using glog, so it still have that.
No, glog only gives you a file name, which is absolutely useless.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It doesn't give you the.
If you can give it a full package, that would probably be enough, and you can keep it to one line.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah. Okay. David, you want to talk about polymorphic resources?
I do. It's a need for the CLI. Our first one is scale, right? And in the beginning, the CLI had custom logic for every scaling resource there was, and so did HPA. We eventually collapsed them down. HPA made it, I think, last release, and the CLI, the work is underway now. There's a community member, Polynomial, who's taking it on and using a generic scale client in the CLI. But when we look at the CLI, there are more resources that match this pattern, where I want to do something that is functionally the same on different resources. And the next example is probably logs. So I think what I'd like to do...
Pods have logs?
I beg your pardon?
Does anything besides a pod have a log?
Yeah. So if you look at what the CLI likes to do, it likes to be able to gather logs from replication controllers and replica sets and daemon sets. And
how do those things have a log?
Well, so there are a couple different options. There is find one, and then there is find all. And the CLI has implemented find one, and there is significant utility in that. Not just for our resources, but for other resources. You can imagine other controllers who would like to be able to say, I'm a workload controller, I've created this, and this is how you get to my logs. And so as a polymorphic resource, that one makes sense.
This might be a topic for a more specific meeting. I don't know if I buy that. I agree it's useful to be able to, like your services is having an error, like collect all the logs from all the things that are that could possibly be having the error, but that's not really the same operation as getting a log from a specific pod.
I think that the CLI that's been working on the user experience for how people actually use our system would disagree. They have the experience dealing with the users that says they want to see the logs for their thing. And they have actually a fairly well-defined and long-lived algorithm for doing that.
So for a long time, Merrick and I, for literally about a year, we had a traceability problem where we wanted to emit events from all places so that way we could actually have traceability for all the transitions that occurred for all the resource objects over time. This became thorny. But with the events V2 API, the plan was to be able to support that level of granularity. So if a user wanted to understand how things were transitioning, they should be able to see the resource object and the messages and the status directly through the events, and it should be traceable. Getting the logs is a separate debug function that I think is orthogonal to this.
I'm trying to figure out if you're saying that you think it would be really useful to have an events sub-resource on resources, which I could see being useful, or if you're saying something else.
I think we should audit the transition for resources across the system when they go from state A to state B, and the edges are not recorded systematically throughout the system. So if you wanted to see transitions of where things are falling over or failing, if you had all of the events traced in the event stream, you would be able to know where things failed and why. And debug information would be extra logs. So having UX for traceability is what it sounds like the core use case is, right? And there are pieces of the puzzle in place, but there's a whole system of not being able to audit the transition of resource objects in the system without using the API server audit log. That's the only other way you could do it.
I want to say that the events mechanism is kind of a separate topic from logs.
It's about traceability. The question he's posing here in the UX use case was about traceability, and that's directly tied to the event stream.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not convinced that's true though. I mean, if you look at a pod log today, you're looking for some application level failure. You're not looking for an API transition failure.
Oh no, pod logs is separate. What I'm saying, he's tying it to other resources, and when he mentioned other resources like replica sets, and what I'm saying is transition of other resources of replica sets is a traceability problem.
Yeah, I mean, we like things like use cases are like in OpenShift, a build's run in pods. We have a build resource. A build resource has a logs endpoint so that users can easily get access to the log for a build. You have there's examples in Cube, like I would say, like job,
I definitely agree.
Logs, cron job logs
to have a log. that makes sense. I'm not convinced that it makes sense for a replication controller to have a log.
Well, and jobs, like jobs is a great example. Cron jobs is a log. Like arguably, if I wanted to see the cron job logs, I would want to see that across that. And there's different ways of implementing it. Like, don't get me wrong, you could put all this in the client side. If you have a UI that's dealing with extensions, like logs for when a service instance comes up in service catalog, again, like some of these are like further out. We just have concrete ones today because they were a useful abstraction at the time. But I do think like event tracing or dependent resources are both examples of polymorphic things. Like, I don't want to have to get the event stream necessarily for every object on the client side and write a bunch of logic to figure out where the event came from. If a resource spans multiple event types, I have no way today to go get the events for all of the things. Like, I can't go get events for deployments because I have to know that deployments create replica sets. And I have to know that replica sets create pods. And I would have to go and make 3 separate calls on the client side, knowing that in order to get all of the events. And so I think, Tim, tying it back into your point, I could imagine an events sub-resource for an object that on the server side does something suitably simple to go find the events for the things that are impacted as a series of calls.
Yeah, I could see that too.
As concrete examples of aggregating sub-resource, polymorphic resources across different types that are trying to solve the same problem.
All right, I want to make sure we get to our last topic. My thought here is I'm definitely in favor of expanding our list of polymorphic resources. I think maybe a topic on our mailing list or something would be good, because I think we probably need some offline discussion about whether things are how much it makes sense to expand the logs concept.
Okay, I can explain it, and I can explain the kube control use case. which I think
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah, I'm a
clearly
little,
demonstrates it. Yeah.
yeah, maybe I'm just being pedantic, but I'm a little weirded out by doing, yeah, it seems like there's a many to one relationship that has to be somehow. Yes, I'm definitely pedantic. Yeah, it seems like there's some sort of relationship that needs to be worked out there.
Yeah, I'll add some links to the code where Kube Control has resolved it from a UX perspective.
Okay. All right, and last topic, taking the aggregation layer to GA. We had some discussion around here, and we were a little worried that if the aggregation layer goes to GA and CRDs don't go to GA, that people will be encouraged to use aggregation when actually CRDs are more appropriate for their use cases. So I think where we decided we are okay if the aggregation API goes to GA, because there's still a lot of like libraries and stuff. It should be clear to people as soon as they dig in that actually it's going to be a lot more work to make an aggregated API than it is a CRD.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Our API server libraries are still not stable. Our READMEs indicate that. But the actual active aggregation for the people that are currently using it, it's been working well, right? We have Service Catalog and the Metrics server and OpenShift have all used it for some time.
The other open question on aggregated API servers is the storage question. And we kind of punted on that, saying users should run their own instances of etcd.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like domain experts who are well-versed in that can pull that off, but I would love to see good documentation on how to do that, and is the core class operator the right way to run that kind of thing. It feels like there's still a gap there.
You know what's funny is, even though we've kind of said run your own etcd, everyone I know who's doing this is using CRD as a storage.
So that would be great to just say that is the storage, but then that begs the question: if API server is
let's please not reopen that.
No, I'm just saying, in practice, everyone right now that I know that is building a real aggregation server for something that's important but not yet super performance critical is using CRD, Service Catalog, and 3 of the OpenShift aggregations that we've discussed, or 2 or 3 of the OpenShift aggregations. And then I feel like somebody else in the community told me about this just recently, but they basically were like, we don't want to run our own etcds, and we're going to go to a storage layer.
I think the storage layer is
the way to go, but it seems to me that it's a more meaningful announcement if CRDs and APIs, aggregated API servers go together, than to say the API is stable, but there's this gap.
I think they are 2 distinct statements, and I think that the storage topic is probably worthy of its own meeting if we need to rehash that. But being able to say this is how you register your thing.
No. Let me be clear. I'm not advocating for this SIG or any group to sign up for creating that storage API and in some finite amount of time. I'm saying that I think we need documentation or guidance for end users who are building aggregated API servers. And if de facto the answer is CRDs, and CRDs are not going GA, then it's not as strong a statement as it could be.
So I don't know that we're trying to make a strong statement. I think we're just acknowledging that the API is stable.
Okay.
I do agree. It feels a little weird. I mean, there's a desire to get CRD to GA. It's just, we know there's more work there than there is on aggregation. And would we hold aggregation just because we want to do more work on CRD? So I tend to weigh the I don't see anything on the horizon that would change aggregation. I understand the concern about advocating it before CRD, but I kind of also think something being in GA has never stopped any of our users from deploying any of it, especially the people who would write CRDs. And so, you know, it's kind of one of those pragmatic things, I think.
Okay, I don't feel super strongly either way, so it's fine.
Yeah, I also, yeah, if people are writing their aggregation to depend on CRDs, then contra our clear guidance how to do that.
Well, I'm just saying, like, the reason why we're doing it is because we figure that if you're giving somebody else something, telling someone how to run etcd when there's already one they have to run, running a second one is usually twice as much work. And doing it well. It's only when you get to like 3 or 4 or 5 etcds that the operational toil starts to go away because you have to automate it. It's like 2 is worse than 0.
Yeah. Okay. Looks like we've made it through our list. Thanks, everybody.
So there's a question by Stefan on the previous item on the CRD to GA. I think he's asking if OpenAPI aggregation for CRD is a blocker for GA or not. If it's online, can you find out?
Is there a reason that that would not be backwards compatible with what we have? My understanding is that when we did the validation, it was in a format that was going to be translatable to.
Yeah. So it's open API, so it's the same spec, but the aggregation is just not implemented. It's doable, okay, but must be done by somebody, especially if it's for 110.
Yes, okay. David, it's yeah. If you're asking if the change of adding the aggregation is backward compatible, yes, it is.
Yeah, and that should probably happen for GA, probably.
Yeah, that's the should it happen for GA? Yeah, it's,
it looks like we already collected a good list of things for CRDs to GA. So does anybody want to volunteer to actually file the features repo issue, or is there one already? How about you, Mehdi?
Yeah, I'm going to do that for versioning. I will do another one for CRD to GA.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.